The alien cubs had been silent for days, eyes wide, bodies trembling at the sight of anyone, soldier, medic, or diplomat. No one could get close until the door slid open and a human walked in. What happened next would be whispered about across the galaxy for generations. The mysterious fear. Marcus Chen had been fixing things since he could hold a wrench. Growing up on Earth's orbital platforms, he learned that in space, a good engineer was worth their weight in platinum. That's how he ended up on Research Station Nexus 9, 40 light-years from home, surrounded by beings that looked like they'd stepped out of a fever dream. His job was simple enough: keep the air flowing, the gravity stable, and the waste recyclers from backing up into the dining hall. Nobody told him he'd end up as the galaxy's most unlikely babysitter. The crisis started 3 weeks before Marcus got involved. The station's nursery ward, a marvel of interspecies cooperation, housed younglings from 17 different worlds. These weren't just any alien children. They were the offspring of diplomats, scientists, and traders who kept the galactic concordat running smoothly. The nursery was supposed to be a symbol of unity, showing that different species could raise their young together in harmony. Instead, it had become a nightmare. Every caregiver who entered the nursery faced the same problem. The moment they stepped through the doors, chaos erupted. Valkorian pups, usually playful as Earth puppies, would huddle in corners whimpering. The crystalline shard younglings would dim their natural glow to almost nothing, trying to become invisible. Tentacled aquari babies would pull themselves into tight balls, refusing to uncurl even for feeding. The situation had gotten so bad that parents were threatening to leave the station entirely. Marcus first heard about the problem from Supervisor Kronax, a being that looked like a praying mantis crossed with a peacock. Kronax cornered him in the maintenance tunnel one morning, his compound eyes reflecting Marcus's confused face 1,000 times over. "Human Chen," Kronax clicked, his mandibles working overtime. "We require your assistance with a delicate matter." Marcus set down his plasma welder carefully. In his experience, when alien supervisors said delicate, they usually meant explosive, toxic, or both. What kind of delicate are we talking about here? The kind where I need a hazmat suit or the kind where I need to update my will? Neither, Kronax said, his feathers rustling with what Marcus had learned was anxiety. We need you to fix something in the nursery. A simple ventilation issue, nothing more. That should have been Marcus's first clue that something was off. The nursery had its own dedicated maintenance team, the best on the station. They didn't need a general systems engineer for a ventilation problem. But Marcus needed the overtime pay, so he grabbed his toolkit and headed for the nursery. The first thing he noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful quiet of sleeping babies, but the tense stillness of creatures trying not to be noticed. The second thing he noticed was Director Taima, standing in the observation room with 3 other officials, all watching the main nursery floor through reinforced transparent steel. Taima looked like someone had stretched a dolphin vertically and given it arms. Her usual calm demeanor was completely shattered. "Human Chen," she said, her voice carrying the ultrasonic harmonics that meant extreme stress in her species. "Thank you for coming. The ventilation unit is in the main play area. Please be quick. The younglings are unsettled." Marcus could see that for himself. Through the observation window, dozens of alien children were pressed against the walls, as far from the center of the room as they could get. The newest caregiver, a 6-armed Bendari named Kixal, stood frozen in the middle, afraid to move in any direction. Every time Kixal shifted even slightly, the cubs would press themselves flatter against the walls. "How long has this been going on?" Marcus asked, already suspecting this wasn't about ventilation at all. 3 weeks, Taima admitted. "We've tried everything. Different species of caregivers, pheromone modifications, environmental adjustments. Nothing works. The younglings won't let anyone near them without displaying extreme fear responses." Marcus studied the scene below. Something about it nagged at him, a pattern he couldn't quite identify. "Let me guess. You want me to go in there and pretend to fix something while you observe whether human presence has any effect?" Tima's skin flushed purple, her species equivalent of embarrassment. "Your reputation for directness is well earned, Human Chen. Yes, we're desperate. We've tried 13 different species. Humans are one of the few we haven't tested." Marcus sighed. He'd signed up to fix machines, not to be a guinea pig in some weird behavioral experiment. But looking at those terrified cubs, something in his chest tightened. They were just kids, scared and confused. "Fine," he said, "but I'm actually going to fix that ventilation unit while I'm in there. It's been making that clicking noise for months." The moment Marcus entered the nursery, everything changed. He'd expected the cubs to either ignore him or panic worse. Instead, they went completely still, but not in fear. It was the stillness of recognition, like running into an old friend in an unexpected place. A small Valkorian pup, covered in silver fur with 6 eyes arranged in a circle, took a tentative step forward. Marcus froze, not wanting to spook them. "Hey there," he said softly, the way he used to talk to his sister's kids back on Earth. "I'm just here to fix some stuff. You all just pretend I'm not here, okay?" The Valkorian pup tilted its head, then made a sound that the translation implant in Marcus's ear interpreted as safe. Not a statement, but a question. The pup was asking if Marcus was safe. "Yeah, buddy, I'm safe. Just a boring human with a toolbox." Marcus slowly moved toward the ventilation unit, keeping his movements calm and predictable. To his amazement, instead of fleeing, several cubs actually followed him, not closely, but maintaining a careful distance, watching everything he did with intense curiosity. As he worked on the ventilation unit, more cubs crept closer. A crystalline shard youngling brightened slightly, its inner light pulsing in what seemed like a greeting. An aquari baby partially uncurled, extending one tentacle toward Marcus's toolbox before pulling back shyly. Within 10 minutes, the entire nursery had transformed. The cubs were still cautious, but the terror was gone. Up in the observation room, Marcus could practically feel the excitement radiating from the officials. He pretended not to notice, focusing on actually fixing the ventilation unit. The clicking was caused by a loose bearing, easy enough to replace. As he worked, a brave Thurian cub, looking like a ball of green fluff with too many legs, actually approached close enough to sniff his boot. "You like that?" Marcus asked, amused. "It's just standard issue station footwear, nothing special." The Thurian made a purring sound and settled down right next to his feet, apparently deciding Marcus made a good shield against whatever had been frightening it. That's when Marcus noticed something odd. The cubs weren't just relaxing around him. They were positioning themselves strategically. The larger, stronger younglings had formed a rough circle with Marcus at the center, while the smaller, more vulnerable ones stayed inside that circle. It wasn't random clustering, it was a defensive formation. Before he could process this observation, Cheeksall made the mistake of trying to approach, probably thinking the cub's calmness meant it was safe. Instantly, every youngling went on alert. The Valkorian pup actually bared its tiny teeth, placing itself between Cheeksall and Marcus. The message was clear. The cubs weren't just calm around Marcus, they were protecting him. The hidden truth. The next morning, Marcus found himself in the station's main conference room, surrounded by xenobiologists, behavioral specialists, and enough recording equipment to film a documentary. Director Tima had called an emergency meeting of what she dramatically named the Youngling Crisis Response Team. Marcus thought it sounded like they were planning to fight crime, not figure out why alien babies liked him. Dr. Yeleth, the station's chief xenobiologist, was leading the discussion. She looked like a giant butterfly that had decided to walk upright, her iridescent wings catching the light as she gestured at holographic charts. "The phenomenon is unprecedented," she declared, her voice musical and lilting. "In my 4 decades of studying interspecies child development, I've never observed anything like this." Marcus sat quietly in his chair, trying to look like he belonged in a room full of advanced degrees and scientific theories. He'd already explained what happened 5 times, but apparently his observation that the kids just seemed to like him wasn't scientific enough. "We must approach this systematically," Dr. Yeleth continued. "I propose we begin with chemical analysis. Human Chen, we'll need samples of your pheromones, skin cells, and saliva to test for unique compounds that might trigger a calming response in the younglings." "Sure," Marcus said, already resigned to being poked and prodded. "But I don't think it's chemical. The cubs were reacting to me before I got close enough for them to smell anything." Dr. Yeleth's wings fluttered dismissively. "Pheromones can travel farther than you might expect, Human Chen. Some species can detect chemical signatures from across entire rooms." The testing began that afternoon. Marcus sat in the nursery while scientists waved sensors over him, took samples, and generally made him feel like a lab experiment. Through it all, the cubs watched with what could only be described as amusement. The Valkorian pup from yesterday, which Marcus had started thinking of as Silver, seemed particularly entertained by the whole process. While Dr. Yeleth analyzed her samples, the station brought in other humans to test whether the effect was species-wide or specific to Marcus. Lieutenant Sarah Kim from security entered first, confident and professional. The cubs immediately went into defensive mode, not quite as extreme as with other species, but definitely not the calm acceptance they showed Marcus. Next came Dr. James Wright from the medical bay, then Chef Roberto from the cafeteria. Same result. The cubs tolerated them better than non-humans, but showed none of the protective behavior they displayed around Marcus. "Fascinating," Dr. Yeleth muttered, reviewing her data. The chemical analysis shows nothing unusual about human Chen's biological signature. We must explore other possibilities. That's when Professor Zen spoke up. Zen was a cerebrite, a species that looked like giant brains in glass cases with mechanical spider legs. Despite their unsettling appearance, cerebrites were known for their incredible intuition about behavioral patterns. Perhaps we're approaching this wrong, Zen suggested, his mental voice echoing directly in everyone's minds. We're assuming the youngling's behavior is a response to something about human Chen. What if it's the opposite? What if they're responding to something only they can perceive? Marcus perked up at this. You mean like they're seeing or sensing something we can't? Precisely, Zen confirmed. Many juvenile organisms possess heightened senses that fade with maturity. It's an evolutionary advantage, allowing them to detect threats adults might miss. Director Tima's skin shifted to a thoughtful blue. But what threat could they be detecting? The station is secure. We have shields, defensive systems, regular patrols. As if in answer to her question, Silver suddenly stood up and ran to Marcus, making urgent chirping sounds. The other cubs quickly followed, surrounding Marcus in their protective formation. They were all staring at the main entrance, their various sensory organs focused on something beyond the door. What's wrong, buddy? Marcus asked Silver, who was pressing against his leg and trembling. The translation implant was struggling with the rapid-fire chirps and clicks coming from all the cubs, but Marcus caught fragments. Danger coming, bad things in the black, hunters hunting. The adults exchanged confused looks. Professor Zen extended his sensors toward the door but detected nothing unusual. Dr. Yeleth checked her instruments. All normal, but the cub's agitation was increasing by the second. Marcus had learned to trust his instincts over the years, and right now his instincts were screaming that the kids were right. Director Tima, he said, standing up carefully to avoid stepping on any clingy younglings. Maybe we should increase security, just to be safe. Tima was about to respond when the station's long-range sensors finally detected what the cubs had been sensing for who knows how long. Alarms began blaring as Tactical Officer Krex's voice boomed over the comm system. All stations, this is not a drill. We have multiple unidentified vessels approaching at high velocity. Signature matches known raider configurations. Estimated time to contact, 30 minutes. The conference room erupted in chaos. Scientists scrambled for evacuation protocols while security personnel rushed to their posts, but Marcus stayed focused on the cubs, who had gone from agitated to oddly calm. They were still in their defensive formation, but their panic had been replaced by determination. Silver looked up at Marcus and made a series of deliberate sounds. The translator worked overtime and finally produced, "We know the old ways. Humans are the guardians. We remember." Before Marcus could ask what that meant, Silver scampered to a wall panel and did something no one expected. The little pup inputted a complex code with its paws, and a section of the wall slid open, revealing a passage Marcus had never seen in any station schematic. The other cubs immediately began herding toward it, clearly expecting Marcus to follow. "That's impossible," Director Tima gasped. "That passage doesn't exist in our blueprints." Silver chirped insistently, and this time the translation was crystal clear. "Hidden paths for dark times. Come, Guardian. We must protect." Marcus looked at the officials, then at the cubs who were waiting for him with absolute trust in their varied eyes. The station shuddered as the raiders' weapons found their range. Emergency lights bathed everything in red. He made his decision. "I'm going with them," he announced, moving toward the hidden passage. "Something tells me they know exactly what they're doing." As Marcus entered the passage with dozens of alien younglings, he heard Professor Zen's mental voice one last time. "I believe we've been looking at this all wrong. The younglings aren't afraid despite sensing danger. They're afraid because they've been waiting for their guardian to arrive." The passage sealed behind them just as the first raider boarding pod hit the station's hull. In the darkness, surrounded by young aliens who treated him like he was their personal superhero, Marcus began to understand that there was much more to this story than anyone had imagined. The cubs weren't just scared children. They were something else entirely, and somehow, they'd recognized him as part of an ancient pattern that the adult aliens had long forgotten. The Protectors. The hidden passages were a marvel of engineering that shouldn't have existed. As Marcus followed the cubs through corridors that twisted and turned in impossible ways, he realized these weren't just maintenance tunnels. They were something far older, built into the very bones of the station by someone who understood that sometimes the smallest beings needed the safest paths. Silver led the way, his 6 eyes glowing softly in the dark, providing just enough light for Marcus to avoid tripping over the smaller cubs. The Aquari baby had wrapped a tentacle around Marcus's wrist, not for comfort, but to guide him when the path split. Every few meters, the crystalline shard youngling would pulse brighter, and the entire group would stop, wait, then continue when it dimmed again. They were communicating in ways Marcus couldn't fully understand, but he recognized coordinated movement when he saw it. "Where are we going?" Marcus whispered, though he suspected the cubs knew exactly where every raider on the station was positioned. Silver responded with chirps that translated to Central Mind Place, where the old memories live. The station shook violently as another boarding pod attached itself to the hull. Through the thin walls, Marcus could hear the chaos outside. Sirens, running feet, the distinctive whine of energy weapons. The raiders weren't here for negotiation. They were here to pillage, and a station full of scientists and their families was an easy target. But the cubs showed no fear now. If anything, they seemed more focused, more purposeful. The Thurian youngster Marcus had noticed earlier was leaving marks on the walls as they passed, using some kind of natural secretion. Trail markers, Marcus realized. They were mapping their route for something or someone following. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, they emerged into a chamber that definitely wasn't on any station map. The room was spherical, its walls covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. They seemed to shift and change, never quite the same twice. In the center sat something that looked like a cross between a computer terminal and an ancient altar. The cubs spread out around the room with practiced ease, each taking a specific position. Silver guided Marcus to the center, next to the strange device. As soon as Marcus touched it, the symbols on the walls stopped shifting and locked into place. They were words, he realized. Words in a language that predated the Galactic Concordat by millennia. "Guardian Protocol activated," a voice said, not through the translator but directly into Marcus's mind. It felt old, older than space travel, older than human civilization. "Genetic markers confirmed. You are recognized." Marcus staggered as information flooded his brain. Images, memories that weren't his own, knowledge he shouldn't have. He saw Earth, but not the Earth he knew. This was Earth millions of years ago, when it served as something else entirely. A guardian world, where a species evolved specifically to protect the young of all species. Humans weren't just another spacefaring race. They were genetically programmed protectors, their evolution guided by something ancient and purposeful. "That's impossible," Marcus gasped. But even as he said it, he knew it was true. It explained everything. Why human children played protective games, why humans pack bonded with anything remotely cute, why they had such strong nurturing instincts across gender lines. Humans were designed to be guardians. The cubs watched him process this information with patient eyes. They had known all along, their genetic memory preserving what the adults had forgotten. Young organisms often retained ancestral memories that faded with age, and these cubs remembered the compact made before their species even reached the stars. Another explosion rocked the station, closer this time. The raiders were moving toward the nursery sector. They knew where the vulnerable were kept, but they didn't know about the guardians. "What do you need me to do?" Marcus asked, though part of him already knew. Silver chirped, and this time Marcus understood without translation. The chamber was a command node, one of thousands hidden throughout the galaxy. From here, a guardian could activate defenses that the Galactic Concordat didn't even know existed. But it required a human touch, a human mind, a human's protective instinct to initialize. Marcus placed both hands on the device and felt the connection establish. Suddenly, he could sense every youngling on the station, not just the ones with him. He could feel their fear, their need for protection. But more than that, he could feel the station itself responding. Hidden systems coming online, dormant protocols awakening. The raiders had made a crucial mistake. They'd attacked a station with younglings on board while a human was present. The Guardian protocols didn't care about politics or jurisdiction. They had one prime directive: protect the young. Through the station's internal sensors, Marcus watched the raiders advancing through the corridors. They were Korthax, a species that had turned to piracy after their homeworld's economy collapsed. Desperate, dangerous, and absolutely unprepared for what was about to happen. The first raider team reached the nursery sector and found it empty. They'd expected easy hostages, leverage against the station's defenders. Instead, they found walls that suddenly weren't walls anymore. The metal itself seemed to come alive, flowing like liquid to entrap weapons and limbs. Non-lethal, but completely immobilizing. The Guardian protocols were precise. Stop the threat but preserve life where possible. The second team tried to retreat but found their path blocked by emergency bulkheads that shouldn't have been there. When they attempted to cut through, the walls absorbed the energy from their weapons and redirected it into stunning pulses that left them unconscious but unharmed. But the third team, the one heading directly for the command center where most of the station's population had gathered, posed a real threat. They had heavier weapons, the kind that could breach the safe room's doors. Marcus could feel the fear spike from the hundreds of beings huddled inside, including parents of the younglings with him. "No," Marcus said firmly, and the station responded. Every artificial gravity generator in that section reversed simultaneously. The raiders found themselves floating, disoriented, their magnetic boots useless against the station's sudden reconfiguration. Then the air pressure dropped just enough to make them drowsy, but not enough to cause permanent damage. One by one, they succumbed to unconsciousness. Within 20 minutes of the initial attack, every raider on the station was neutralized without a single fatality on either side. The Guardian protocols were efficient, measured, and absolutely overwhelming when protecting the young. As the immediate threat passed, Marcus felt the connection to the station fade, leaving him exhausted but exhilarated. The cubs gathered around him, making their various sounds of approval and relief. Silver nuzzled against his leg, purring like a cat despite looking nothing like one. "Is it over?" Marcus asked, though he could already sense the answer through the residual connection. The ancient voice spoke once more. "The immediate threat is neutralized, but the galaxy must remember, the Guardians have returned." Emergency teams found them an hour later, still in the hidden chamber. Director Taima, Dr. Yeleth, and Professor Zen stood at the entrance, staring in amazement at the room that shouldn't exist and the human who had somehow saved them all. How, was all Taima could manage. Marcus looked at the cubs, who were now playfully climbing over him like he was a jungle gym. "Turns out, we've got a job we forgot about. Humans are guardians, always have been. These little ones just remembered what we forgot." Professor Zen's mental voice was awed. "The implications of this are staggering. If humans truly are genetically designed protectors, it would explain so much about your species' behavior. Your pack bonding, your adoption of other species as pets, your fierce protection of children even when they're not your own." Dr. Yeleth's wings were vibrating with excitement. "We'll need to study this, understand the mechanisms, the evolutionary path that led to—" "No," Marcus interrupted gently but firmly. "No studies, no experiments. The cubs trusted me because they recognized what I am. If we turn this into a science project, we'll lose that trust. Besides," he added, gesturing to the symbols on the walls that were already beginning to fade, "I don't think this knowledge is meant to be dissected. It's meant to be lived." In the days that followed, word spread throughout the station and beyond. The cubs continued to seek out Marcus, but now the adults understood why. It wasn't fear driving the younglings to him. It was instinct, genetic memory of a time when humans stood as guardians for all young life in the galaxy. The Galactic Concordat's response was swift and dramatic. Records were uncovered, ancient texts suddenly making sense. Humanity's rapid acceptance into the galactic community hadn't been because of their technology or resources. It had been recognition, a deep-seated memory in every species that humans were meant to be there, watching over the vulnerable. Marcus found himself at the center of a renaissance of sorts. Other humans throughout the galaxy reported similar experiences with young aliens. Nurseries, schools, and childcare facilities began actively recruiting human staff, not as an experiment, but as a return to something that had always been meant to be. But for Marcus, the big picture was less important than the small one. Every day, he continued his work in the nursery, fixing things that broke and watching over cubs who no longer cowered in fear. Silver had become his constant shadow, and the other younglings treated him like a favorite uncle who could make any scary thing go away. During quiet moments when the cubs were napping in a pile around his feet, Marcus would sometimes feel that connection to the greater network. Thousands of humans throughout the galaxy, each discovering their forgotten purpose. They weren't conquerors or explorers, they were guardians, and they were finally coming home to their role. The raiders who had attacked the station were tried and sentenced, but Marcus had advocated for leniency. The Guardian protocols had taught him something important. Protection didn't always mean destruction. Sometimes it meant showing mercy, teaching better ways, helping even those who had tried to harm you. 6 months later, when the first Korthax refugee ship arrived at the station seeking asylum, it was Marcus who met them at the docking bay. Their young ones were scared, traumatized by the loss of their world. But when they saw the human, something ancient in their genetic memory recognized safety. Within minutes, the Korthax cubs were playing with Silver and the others, all under the watchful eye of their guardian. Director Taima found him there later, sitting on the floor while younglings from 18 different species climbed over him, each trusting him completely. "You know," she said, her skin shifting to amused purple, "when you first came aboard, your file said you were just a maintenance engineer." Marcus smiled, helping a tiny Korthax cub reach a toy on a high shelf. "I still am. I just fix different things now. Broken trust, forgotten purposes, scared kids who need to remember they're safe. It's all maintenance when you think about it." As the station continued its orbit around a foreign star, in a galaxy that was slowly remembering an ancient compact, Marcus Chen went about his work. He was a guardian, humanity's forgotten purpose finally remembered. And in a universe full of dangers, there was no job more important than making sure the young ones knew they were protected. The cubs had been terrified of everyone until the human walked in. Now, they knew they never had to be afraid again. The Guardians had returned, and the galaxy was safer for it. After all, sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't a weapon or a ship or even an idea. Sometimes it's just someone willing to stand between danger and those who can't protect themselves. And humans, it turned out, had been designed for exactly that job all along.